Here are some additional activities to go along with learning about wildflowers, including a wildflower scavenger hunt. I encourage you to get out into our recreational areas, but please respect other users, including turkey hunters, which are hunting during this wildflower season.
Hi everyone, this is Emily Herring, naturalist with Marshall County Conservation. I thought that we'd shift gears a little bit this video and head into the woods. The woods in the springtime is an awesome place to be. Lots of different birds and plants and even insects that are starting to become active. I'm here on a park along the Iowa River and I just saw 2 soft-shelled turtles going into the water, so things are really starting to warm up. But you'll notice behind me that the trees aren't quite leafed out, and that's important for our spring ephemerals. And what spring ephemerals are wildflowers. So before the trees leaf out, those spring wildflowers soak up as much sun as they can, because once the leaves come onto the trees, they do not get any more sunshine. And there's lots of different spring ephemerals in our woods. So I'm going to take you on a hike and I'm going to show you a few of the different species of spring wildflowers that you can find when you go out and about. I hope this video gets you excited to go out and explore, whether that's going mushroom hunting or seeing if you find some cool insects or just being outside and getting some fresh air. I hope that you can just get a little inspiration to be outdoors this time of year, because it's a beautiful time to be outside.
So this is one of our first spring ephemerals in the woods in Iowa. Now, this spring ephemeral is called Hepatica. Spring ephemerals are flowers that have to have a quick life cycle because they only have sunshine for so long before the trees get their leaves on. So this flower, in fact, has already even bloomed itself because it had to. Those little things in there, those are where the flowers were. Now, Hepatica is pretty easily identified by its leaves that have those 3 shaped lobes. When Hepatica blooms, it produces a variety of colors, including blue, pink, and white. There is also a large variety in the number of petals that it has. Now, Hepatica in itself usually has a green leaf to start off with, but as the season progresses into summer and fall and even into winter, its leaves begin to turn a dark maroon color. And that's how it gets the nickname liverwort. Liverwort is what people did before we had modern day medicine. They believed that if the leaf was a certain shape or color that resembled an organ, then that's what it was used to treat. So Hepatica was used to treat all different sorts of ailments, including things that were wrong with the liver, and hence the name, it gets the liverwort, which is really interesting to think about. You know, back before we have medicines and pharmacies, the people would go to the woods and they would use the plants that they found to treat problems. This one was in fact used for coughs, lung ailments, indigestion, liver, and lots of different medical problems that people faced throughout the years. This is another one of our early spring wildflowers called bloodroot. It has a very unique shaped leaf that is easily identified in the spring woodlands. Now, its leaf can still be found, however, its flower has already come and gone this spring, and it produces a beautiful white flower with a yellow center. Now, bloodroot gets its name because its root is red, and when you break it open, it actually has a red blood-like substance in the center of it. Now, that red substance was used to paint skin as well as dye clothing in early times. Now, the bloodroot is a relative of a poppy, so it has the same characteristics of morphine, and actually its root is quite poisonous. This pretty little pink and white spring wildflower is called a spring beauty. A spring beauty also gets the nickname fairy spud because it has a little tuber that it grows from, and that tuber was dug by Native Americans and pioneers and eaten as a potato substitute. The tuber of this plant are also eaten by rodents, and in other parts of the country, the grizzly bear loved to dig up and eat the tubers as well. The next spring wildflower we're going to talk about is the trout lily, or dogtooth violet. Now, this beautiful little flower hangs down in a nodding form with usually white and purplish lavender colored petals. It often gets the name thousand leaf because thousands of these leaves will appear before the flowers appear. Now, if you were to pick both the leaves and the flowers, the plant would die. So this is a great example of leaving something for the next person to see and not picking the beautiful flowers. This spring wildflower is one that we commonly find in our yards. and it is the violet. Now, violets can range in color from purple to yellow or white, and they're also found in our woodlands. Violets are very important for early pollinators, and most parts of the violet are edible. So, when you're out in the woods, you can find violets, or you can even just step outside your door and find them in your yard as well.
This spring wildflower is called wild ginger. It grows in colonies on hillsides in the woodlands. You'll notice that it has a red flower, and that red flower mimics carrion, which is dead animals. The red matches meat, and it has a horrible smell, which attracts gnats and flies, which are the pollinators for this plant. This type of wild ginger is not the ginger we use to cook and eat. That ginger actually comes from tropical locations, although this ginger was used by pioneers to flavor their food.
This spring wildflower is called Dutchman's breeches. If you look at it, it looks like a pair of pants hanging on a line, although the pant legs are sticking up in the air. It has fern-shaped leaves, and it gets the nickname Little Blue Staggers because sometimes cattle would eat the entire plant, including the roots, which are poisonous, and it would cause the cattle to stagger. This flower is buttercup. There are 12 different species of buttercup in the Iowa woodlands. This one is bright yellow and waxy, although some can be small and green. This is one flower you have to be careful when you handle because some types of buttercup can actually cause blisters on your skin. Oftentimes, the spring woodland hills are covered in white this time of year, and it is from this flower right here. This is the false rue anemone. You'll notice the small lobed rounded leaves to be able to identify it. It also has the relative of a woodland anemone, which has longer, pointier leaves, but still has the white flower that can easily be confused with the false rue anemone. This spring wildflower is quite unique. It is called Jack in the Pulpit. The jack is the little spike inside of the flower. Jack in the Pulpit likes to grow in wet areas and blooms April through June. When it's done blooming, it produces bright red berries. The entire plant is poisonous, however, it was used for medicinal uses by Native Americans. It was also used by Meskwaki Indians during disputes with other tribes. They would cook meat with the root of this plant and then leave the meat behind, hoping that the other warriors would find it and eat it, and thus becoming sick and even possibly dying from calcium oxate poisoning. So this fun little plant is Jack in the Pulpit. This beautiful purplish blue flower is called Sweet Williams. It has a wonderful fragrance and grows in the woodlands and blooms from April to June. It is actually a member of the fox family and not a relative of the Sweet Williams that we find in our garden stores. I remember it by it has a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs like a little boy named William.
Normally I would discourage you from picking any plants. However, there are some plants that we call invasive species that actually do not belong in the ecosystem here in central Iowa, and this is one of them. This is garlic mustard, and it spreads. In fact, you can see it's here, all the way down and almost into the river. And there's a couple down there. And so this time of year is a good time to pull it. You don't want it to go to seed. It has tons of tiny little seeds, and that's why it spreads so well. So pulling this up by the root, and actually pulls up really easy by the root. Has a really short root. And then you can just, you can burn it, you can leave it to dry on the trail is usually what I do, but if you don't want to have to carry it with you. But what I'd try to do is try to pull out as much as I possibly can to prevent it from spreading and taking over the area. It will compete with the native wildflowers, and so it'll just become a pasture of this stuff if we're not careful. So that's why we want to get rid of it when we can, when it's smaller and we're able to pull it and before it takes over the wildflowers.
This beautiful yellow spring wildflower is called bellwort. It gets its name from the hanging bell-shaped yellow flowers, and pioneers use this to eat the leaves and the upper part of the stems or the early stalks as a substitute for asparagus. One of my favorite plants on the trail, and it can be found all season long, is this plant. It's called bedstraw. Bedstraw is what we call a hitchhiker plant. Now, it gets its name because bedstraw was used to fill in pioneers' mattresses. They had like a gigantic pillowcase that they would stuff with this material, and it kept away bugs and insects and things like that, which was important back in pioneer times. Bed straw is really interesting because it has lots of little teeny tiny hooks on it and it sticks to you. Hence the reason why it's called a hitchhiker. So if you've ever walked out of an area and you've had some of this stuck into your shoelaces, well, it's meant to be that way. It helps it move from one area to another and grow in a new place. This umbrella-shaped leaf belongs to a mayapple. Mayapples bloom here in the next week or two and will produce a beautiful white flower, which has a different scent that some people do not like. They also grow a greenish yellow fruit, which can be poisonous if it's not ripe. Potawatomi and Meskwaki Indians actually favored mayapple for its treatment of snake bites. One of my favorite spring wildflowers is the marsh marigold. It has a round-shaped leaf and bright yellow flowers and can grow up to 2 feet tall. It grows in wet areas and can cover the area with its soft, fibery roots. Now, the Irish folklore believed that this flower had significance on May Day, when the witches and the fairies were supposed to be particularly active. They would hang mayflowers above the door to help protect their cows' fertility. This last spring wildflower is the bluebell. It gets its name from the blue bell-shaped flowers. It'll cover the forest floor in the springtime and disappear by the summer. The long-shaped tube of the bell makes it hard to be pollinated, and thus it is only pollinated by bees that have long tongues, like honeybees and bumblebees. I hope you enjoyed learning about spring wildflowers. Make sure to print off a scavenger hunt and head out to one of our parks this weekend and see what kind of wildflowers you can find. If you take any pictures, post them on Facebook so we can see you out and about in our parks. I hope our paths cross soon, and if you have any questions, you can always email me.